Good morning and welcome to the fifth seminar in our Going Digital series, Getting Closer to Distance Learning, Online Education in Latin America, organized by the Wilson Center's Latin American program and co-sponsored by Zoom Video Communications and the Information Technology Industry Council, ITI. My name is Benjamin Gadan. I'm the Deputy Director of the Latin American program here at the Wilson Center. As you know by now, our Going Digital series features CEOs, senior policymakers, and other experts discussing the challenges and opportunities the region faces now that so many Latin Americans are very suddenly very much online. Our inaugural event focused on the explosion of financial technology, or fintech, in Latin America, and the lessons learned from Uruguay, sometimes known as the Silicon Valley of South America. We heard insights from the CEO of dLocal, from Uruguay's ambassador to the United States, and from the CEO of Hackers and Founders. For our second Going Digital seminar, we discussed how to solve the region's digital talent gap with insights from the CEO of Workana, Salesforce's Government Affairs Director for Latin America, and a senior advisor to Peru's Digital Secretariat. Our third Going Digital event on the future of digital trade involved a conversation with Chile's Vice Minister for Foreign Trade, the CEO of Globant and Amazon Web Services, Maria Inés Baqué, who previously served as Argentina's Secretary of Digital Government and Technological Innovation. Our most recent Going Digital conversation examined privacy and cybersecurity issues, highlighting the steps needed to retain public confidence in digital technologies, with insights from Microsoft's Chief Technology Officer for Global Market Development, from Visa's Head of Latin America Government Engagement, and from the Director of Brazil's newly established National Data Protection Agency. I mention all of this now because all four webcasts are available on our website, where you'll also find information on future Going Digital events. Today, we will explore how technology could provide solutions to Latin America's urgent and long-term educational challenges. You should participate in this conversation. To do so, please send us your questions in the Zoom Q&A chat window now and throughout this dialogue. Again, you're welcome immediately and throughout this conversation to submit your questions, which we will review and incorporate into our conversation. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to devastate Latin America. The impacts on public health are the most obvious. The region is home to 8% of the world's population, but it has suffered 21% of coronavirus cases and 32% of global deaths. Very unfortunately, the end is not yet in sight. Only 18% of Latin Americans are fully vaccinated against this virus, according to PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization. That sluggish vaccine rollout is permitting the rapid spread of new strains of COVID-19, including the highly contagious Delta variant that has also caused cases to spike in the United States. As a result, social distancing measures remain an essential tool for combating the pandemic in Latin America. But it is not a cost-free policy, and the increasing price of reducing personal contact is falling heavily on this region's children. The virus has closed schoolhouses around the world, but no region has seen bigger educational disruptions than Latin America. Over the last year, an estimated 60% of Latin American school children missed the equivalent of an entire year of school. That crisis has enormous implications for inequality and economic development in this region. Already, millions of the region's children have dropped out and might not return to schooling. The World Bank says the pandemic could increase the dropout rate by 15%, and it warns of serious and lasting consequences for a whole generation. This includes a sharp increase in the number of Latin American students who will find themselves below minimum proficiency on the closely watched PISA exam. The damage is getting worse. Today, only 3 countries in the region have fully resumed in-person learning, according to UNICEF data. In most, but not all countries, schools have partially reopened, though the coronavirus's accelerating spread could lead governments once again to send school children home. Some of the negative impacts of school closures have no easy remedy. For example, as many as 10 million kindergarten through 12th grade students in Latin America rely upon school nutrition programs as a major source of food. For that reason, safe school reopenings remain paramount. In the meantime, however, vast improvements to the accessibility and quality of remote education in Latin America are within reach. both for now and in the region's post-pandemic future. This is especially true for the region's poor and rural populations, including for families with limited internet access, perhaps as many as 1/3 of all Latin Americans. For example, 92% of students in southern Brazil have participated in remote learning. That's compared to only half of students in Brazil's Northwest. In Mexico, 70% of elementary students have to use mobile phones for their remote education access. Meanwhile, even students with adequate internet access are struggling educationally. Despite remarkable digitalization in many sectors in Latin America, ranging from financial technologies to telemedicine, too many of the region's students are experiencing remote learning as recorded lessons broadcast on television or radio, or simply receiving printed materials that are distributed to overburdened parents. Fortunately, several countries in the region have used the pandemic to adopt or expand effective remote learning tools that offer solutions to short-term and long-term educational challenges in Latin America. In part to address widening learning gaps, many leaders have also redoubled efforts to expand internet connectivity. Educational technologies, or Edtech, hold enormous promise to address pandemic setbacks and to complement traditional educational strategies in the future. In Uruguay, for example, pre-pandemic investments in a digital learning platform, the pre-pandemic distribution of hardware to students, and efforts to increase connectivity assured greater educational continuity throughout this public health emergency than we saw in many other parts of the region and the world. Others have taken steps to catch up, such as Argentina and Chile, which have assured no cost or at least low cost access to online learning platforms. To discuss these challenges and the possibilities technologies offer for the region's pandemic era and post-pandemic education sector, I'm excited to introduce our experts for today's seminar. They include Leandro Folgar, president of Uruguay's famed Plan Ceibal, who joins us from Montevideo, Uruguay; Cristina Cardenas, governmental affairs manager for Iberoamerica at Coursera, who joins us from Mexico City, Mexico; and Jacqueline Lopez, head of government and industry relations for Ericsson's Latin America South division. She joins us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Jacqueline, I'm going to start with you because the questions of connectivity that I've just raised, I think, undergird this entire conversation, right? Without decent connectivity, without the hardware, but also the government investments in affordable internet access, none of the technologies that we're going to discuss today would be relevant to potential solutions to these educational crises and broader social and economic inequalities. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit from the private sector perspective, how you see the region's progress over the last several years and importantly over the pandemic in increasing access to the internet, increasing access to the necessary hardware, increasing minimally access to the minimal technologies needed so students can continue their educations remotely. Jacqueline, thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your question. Thank you for the invitation. Also, thank you, ITI, and congratulations for organizing this important event. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I'm going to start briefly talking about Ericsson. Ericsson is a pioneer in the technology sector. We right now are also a pioneer in 5G, where we have the technology available in 45 countries. And to build all this, innovation is part of our DNA. And education is a way to foster innovation. So I think it's a very important discussion that we discuss all the gaps and what we need to improve in this sense. I brought a couple of slides here just to show some data. If you can, Beatrice, can you please thanks. So what we know is that COVID posed a lot of challenge to our system. The World Bank has research that shows that 120 million people, 120 million children are facing challenge to end the school year, and they may lose this year. And the pandemic was not easy for them. Also, Ericsson has a research that shows that about 2/3 of global children do not have access to internet at home. And this makes more complicated for these people, for these children to study. So on one hand, we have those challenges, not only from the health and the social perspective, but it's also pose challenge to education. On the other hand, what we notice is that education can also benefit from the virtual environment. And how is that? The pandemic asked us to learn how we can use connectivity to access education. So actually, this increased the access. People just had to use remote education. And also, by doing that, it allowed all those children to have quality education, because sometimes you may not be able to provide this at the same time for different locations. But if you leverage remote education, you can contribute to that. So what we noticed is we have the downside that this pandemic's brought to us. But on the other hand, the quality of education can achieve more people. We can leverage that. And what we need to fill the gaps, what should we do as a society to achieve the benefits and to overcome the challenge from the pandemic in terms of education? Actually, we have two key possibilities. First one is the public policy perspective. From the public policy perspective, it's important, as Benjamin mentioned, that the governments design a policy to enhance connectivity. This is based in infrastructure, but that's not the only challenge. We also face lots of tax, security, innovation, and other kinds of problems that needs to be addressed in order to achieve the outcome as the final product, as education. From that perspective, what we are noticing worldwide, and this is coming to Latin America, is that some countries already started in terms of spectrum to achieve policies in which they change spectrum fees to investments in the sector. And this kind of design that is coming to Latin America now, some countries are, for instance, discussing the 5G auction. It allows remote locations to enhance the connectivity. And as a result, we foster education because we give more access to society. Governments shouldn't do this by themselves. It's a partnership with the private sector, with organizations, NGOs, and so on. But also, there is a very relevant role complementing the public policy initiatives, which is the corporate social responsibility. For instance, Ericsson is committed to society. And here we have an example on what we are doing in the sense. This slide shows a program Ericsson is fostering. It's worldwide, but as you can see in the map, it's also available here in Latin America. The program is called Connect to Learn. It's our flagship education program. For the past 10 years, more than 200,000 students have been benefited worldwide by this program. And right now we have 25 countries involved in this initiative. We have 4 objectives with this program. First one, access to digital connectivity. And then in terms of diversity, girls in ICT. Third one, education in humanitarian contexts. And finally, digital skills, because you have the connectivity, but you also need to foster the skills so people are able to use that. And then in the next slide, we have one example based in this program. which is called the GIGA initiative, the GIGA project. It's actually a partnership between Ericsson and UNICEF, in which we are committed to map school internet connectivity. So we find the gaps in this 3-year initiative, and we are mapping actually 35 countries. So we are able to identify what should be our next steps. This project is actually composed by other partners. So everyone in this initiative has its own role and can contribute to that. As Benjamin was saying, we are very close to the connectivity side and compromised to the society. So we are mapping the gaps, and together with our partners, we are going to address that. As I mentioned, the part of the pandemics has the downsides, but also the benefits. And once we can overcome those challenges, we may be able to use the benefits from this. There are studies showing that if you use, for example, connectivity to enhance education, you may be able to learn 4 times as fast as the presential mode. So why not? We should use this kind of things. Moving to the next slide, we will understand that actually we have several benefits by increasing connectivity. And these benefits, they involve not only the students we are talking about, but the whole society and also the economy. Remember, innovation is based on education. We are building the country based on education. But we don't do this by ourselves. It's a partnership. Public, private sector, and the third sector, all of them are working together on this. And it's very important because this way we understand that a world where limitless connectivity improves life, redefines business, and pioneers a sustainable future. So let's work together on this to continue foster connectivity and remote education. Thank you, Benjamin, for your question.
Excellent. Many thanks, Jacqueline, for the presentation and for giving a nice framework for the rest of our conversation when it comes to actual access and some of the other really critical questions that we'll address over the next hour. Christina, as promised, I want to turn to you and talk about the education technology, the EdTech sector itself. We've heard in my remarks and from Jacqueline questions of connectivity, but I want to talk now about the technologies themselves, how far along you perceive they are in the development and adoption. You know, I mentioned in passing that Latin Americans have become much more engaged in digital technologies in other sectors throughout the pandemic, including financial technologies, telecommuting, telemedicine. I'm relying on you, Christina, to tell us whether EdTech has been a part of that transition in a meaningful way. I note that if you look at the data, it still seems to represent, I think the latest in 2019, just 4% of venture capital deals were with EdTechs. So, you know, growing at a much slower rate than financial technologies and other digital sectors. So Christina, tell me, you know, what is the EdTech scene looking like in Latin America these days?
Well, thank you first for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate in this conversation because during the pandemic, we used a lot Zoom for our training teachers. And I want to start how I arrived to my point of view of how I see technology for the next years. And I consider that Jacqueline data, it's very what we saw in Latin America. Like we have a lot of users of internet every day. The gap between men and women reduced, but the use that we are, how are we using the technology is the biggest gap that we are having because we are not having enough skills to use it properly. And that is how we started with the pandemic. And I want to talk a little bit about how we started to face and how it was surprising. Coursera was doing the same that I was doing in my company. I was working at the government before the pandemic started, and I was the head of a national program developing skills for teachers, students, and women, everybody who wants to develop digital skills from the Ministry of Education. I was in charge of like 25 million students to develop their skills and almost 2 million teachers. So after my work there, I opened my own company, and suddenly the pandemic came. So I was aware of the need that the teachers mainly will face, but also the parents and students at home will be facing. So we were launching courses for free at the beginning, very at the beginning of the pandemic. And surprisingly, we have like 700 people enrolling our first webinar in Zoom. And we were not charging money, but we were surprised that all the resistance that teachers used to have disappeared immediately because they didn't know what to do and they were very scared of what is coming. And using the national data and also the experience that we had in the past, my partner, who is the head of the computer science in my home university, TAM director, start planning how can we help and how can we be part of the solution for this educational crisis. And so we start doing these some webinars at the beginning, I say for free, and we were having a lot of teachers, and we start talking about how they can use technology, knowing that the connectivity is very low, that the parents didn't have enough computers. We had in that time 44% of households with computers, and they have to share it with the parents and the other brothers who were at home. So we need to find strategies also because the connectivity, even we have 80 million people connected over 6 years in Mexico. At home, the connectivity is very unstable. Normally they connect with their mobile phones and they don't have enough data at home to use it all day and use it with videos that consume all the data. Also, the economical crisis was not the best to buy more connectivity. So we were looking for different strategies and try to help teachers to use technology with less connectivity, more wisely, reduce the content. And we were using a lot of frameworks like the ISTE framework, like the DIGCOM Edu framework from the European Commission, and other frameworks to try to help teachers with the methodology, not only with the digital tools. We also were using WhatsApp. We were finding different strategies for the teachers to help the parents, the students, because it was not only an educational crisis, but also an emotional crisis. So we were also making groups, focus groups with teachers to understand their needs. We were using the Zoom tools. That's why we were using a lot of Zoom, because we were also the rooms that help us to interact with a lot of people. And during that pandemic, we were helping more than 6,000 teachers. And we have more than 146 webinars, and we were doing our best, trying also to have the best practices. Like, for example, I would like to share some of them. First, we were identifying the goals for the teachers and what they want to do in the classes. And also we were try to do the courses will really use application. We didn't want to try to go to the theory. We were like, with this application, with this tool, you can do this, you can evaluate like that, you can learn, you can help the students in this and other way. We were also using a lot of interactive and playful tools because we had so many teachers connected. And we also, later in the pandemic, we were also teaching students from, for example, computational thinking, and we have more than 500 students connected at the same time. And we were using Mentimeters, Kahoots. We were using music before we started the classes. Like, we were trying to interact a lot with the teachers. And also, we try to go in a deeper and shorter and very target content that can help them. And during this time, we also saw a lot of need for teachers to create communities. So we were creating groups and supporting groups for teachers and also for parents. And while we were doing that, we realized that the teachers need more than we help them with the digital tools, but they need emotional support. So one day we were hearing so much because we started to be a community. The same teachers came over and over. And while we were doing that, we observed that many lost families during the pandemic. And when we were like, okay, we were launch course related to thanatology. We have more than 1,300 teachers enrolled with relatives of them. And that was the first time that I saw that this crisis it was bigger than only education, and it is also emotional. So while we were doing all this, and we documented everything because we have a survey at the beginning, a survey at the end of each course, and then we get money from different groups that help us to keep going with the classes. And we also were teacher women that lost their jobs because they don't have digital skills. So it was a whole experience during the pandemic. I'm very happy to start for free the courses, and then see that my women network that I have in Conectadas were helping and giving us support through their companies and chambers of technology in Mexico. And we were able to continue doing this. Was amazing how we saw that technologies like Zoom help us to reach teachers that in their schools, they didn't have any support because principals were not helping, and because the only way to arrive to kids were televisions, because in Mexico, the biggest national program has the project in televisions only. So with these tools and with help, we were able to arrive to more teachers and more parents and more students and women. And later on, I joined Coursera very recently. It's my 4th week there. And I'm very surprised that while we were doing this in a small scale, they were doing the same. Coursera opened the platform that that we have now, because I'm fan out of Coursera. We opened the platform to different universities and different countries that need to help population, because we were all facing this big problem. And the numbers that also we have during the pandemic were very amazing, because we have like more than 2 million people connected from universities. And we have 1 million citizens connected with the programs that Coursera has. And it was very interesting seeing that how they designed the project was similar in a small scale that we were doing at 3C, my former company, which is like cure the content, give practical things to the students. Asynchronic information and content is very important, because women in particular don't have enough time to learn in all the time. So if you have content like Coursera has, like in a platform that you can return later, it's another option for all the dropouts that we will see during this pandemic, because the economical situation, because they lost parents, because they lost jobs, and because also the new jobs that we were seeing before the pandemic, that the 4th Industrial Revolution, the Society 5.0 promise, are not the skills that are not developing at universities. So I can tell that this pandemic, as Jacqueline mentioned, wake us up. I was already fighting before. I was working a lot with Plan Ceibal when I was working at the government, and we were like following what they were doing all the time. And now, suddenly, after 6 years of being at the government fighting for all this, we saw it recently in front of us. And I see through Coursera that we have a lot of new revolution in education, because I think that with the technology now we are less afraid to go and use it and to keep learning, not only for a title, but for life. Because what this pandemic shows us is that we need to be resilient, that emotional support is important, that skills are changing very fast. According to the data of Work Economic Forum, it's 4 years what you need and skill, and then you need to transform and move to another one. So I'm very excited for what is coming, and I'm very excited that companies are helping, because the government can do it alone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina. I'll turn to you, Leandro, in just a moment. I just wanted to know, Christina, that I valued your focus on teachers and the support that teachers need in this process. It was an omission in my introductory remarks, which focused primarily on the responsibilities of governments and also families and students themselves. You're right. Teachers, require the hardware at home, a decent computer, so that the teachers themselves can access these platforms, and the training necessary to be able to use these, to be able to have digital textbooks, to be able to interact with parents and students remotely. Just very, very briefly, Christina, do you get a sense that governments and school districts are recognizing the need to equip teachers and to train teachers so that these technologies can be deployed effectively, or have others omitted that in their, admittedly very rapid planning for remote education over the last year or so?
Yeah, I think that during, at least for example, my experience in Mexico is that we never forgot about teachers training, but the administration to bring technology to schools was faster and bigger. That when the government wanted to train teachers, the new administration comes. So I hope that with this pandemic, we can see the opposite. Like think first in train teachers, because teachers find a way to train they find their devices if they need it, because if they don't find a reason to use it, it won't be demanded. So I hope that with this pandemic, governments in general change to train teachers first. and I think that the policies that we have in Latin America also doesn't matter if you were very advanced, like I'm sure Uruguay faced it. We were connecting schools, while in this moment the crises were at home. And that's how I think that even the more prepared governments were facing like what's going on now. But I think, and I hope that governments after this pandemic realize that teachers need to renovate because the world changed, and the skills that we need to teach at schools and universities and in every center that want to reskill people need to think in what the demand is outside asking, and not what the old programs that we have we don't need that old curriculums. We need to transform, and teachers are the force to do that.
Excellent. An important point that countries did make investments in many cases, but they were for infrastructure that was based at the schools themselves, which was an understandable strategy before social distancing came upon us. I want to remind everyone, please continue to send your excellent questions to us. Do so through your Q&A chat window on Zoom. You see it available at the bottom of your screen. You've already sent excellent questions, and we'll get to them throughout the conversation. As promised, however, I want to turn to Uruguay, turn to Leandro, learn more about Plan Ceibal. For those who aren't aware, the context for Uruguay for many people was a country that has been a beneficiary of some planning in this area before the pandemic. So one of these examples of a government that made decisions for the long term, and they yielded some benefits that maybe weren't as expected in the short term, when suddenly the kinds of access to technologies that Uruguay invested in were absolutely essential almost overnight. Leandro, what has been Uruguay's experience and maybe some lessons learned for other countries that might be playing catch up in this regard?
Well, hi, Benjamin, and hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And it's interesting to listen to the conversations that we have, that the other panelists have presented, because there are so many issues that we have to face now after this hit we took with the pandemic, and there are so many challenges ahead of us that both Jacqueline and Maria Cristina have laid out for us to think about. In terms of the experience in Uruguay, maybe most people think that because we had Ceibal, the pandemic wouldn't be a problem for us, and we would seamlessly move from face-to-face learning to online education, and it wasn't the case. But it was the case that next year Ceibal is going to be 15 years. So making a technology, innovation, and education strategy a state let's say a state policy is fundamental. I mean, it's the fourth government that Ceibal is. Ceibal has passed through 4 governments and different political parties, and we could manage to maintain a state policy in terms of education and technology, and that was fundamental. That was of paramount importance for us to have this infrastructure and the possibility to give a quick response. The reality was, as Maria Cristina was mentioning, that we were connecting schools. We had 100% of schools connected to the internet with high-speed connectivity, and for us, that was amazing. Also, the biggest video conferencing network in schools that allowed us to have some interesting programs like Se Vale en Inglés, in which you partner a remote teacher from another country with the teacher in the classroom, and would give this tremendous experience of learning English from a native speaker, leveraging that experience on technology. But all that wasn't possible to use all that infrastructure because of the pandemic. So we had this huge issue about what's the connectivity like at home, what kind of internet connections they are having. Uruguay had this great penetration of fiber optics in the country, and actually, let's say something like 70% of the households had some kind of connectivity, which is huge for the region. But at the same time, we still had this challenge on how we can remove more obstacles for our students to, let's say, benefit from all the infrastructure and all the technology we had available for them. And there was when we took some, let's say, quick decisions. First of all, do not multiply messages. One main platform for communication, and let's say the minimum level of complexity in terms of what should we let's say take care of, and it would be the connection between students and teacher. We have to guarantee that, and from there try to build on. And then we had some new arrangements with the telecom companies here, and we try to move. 80% of our students are in the public system in Uruguay, so we try to move our virtual system to make it free for all, free of access. So what we did actually was try to make we embedded a video conferencing tool in our LMS, so that every student and teacher could use that solution. And at the same time, we made some arrangements both with the companies providing those services and the telecom companies, so that the video conferencing, for example, would be free of charge. So we can actually say right now in Uruguay that we made our public system free for everyone, both face-to-face or online, and that's huge. But at the same time, it required a lot of innovation in terms of how we generate from the government the buying agreements with our providers, how we can make arrangements with the telecom companies so that we can find some kind of technology arrangement in which they can actually provide a service which is as data intensive. It would be a video conferencing for every student in the system, and at the same time trying to renovate the whole training system for our teachers. 50% of our teachers wanted some kind of training during the first 3 months of the start of the pandemic. So there are mainly 3 areas in which we made big changes. It would be in infrastructure, in the way we built agreements with our providers, and also in the technology we made available for our students, and at the same time understanding the demands of our our communities, our schools. What are actually their problems, and try not to throw solutions for problems that nobody has, but maybe in our heads are something important, or because they are the latest technology, they should be useful. So that for us was a huge learning curve, let's say.
Excellent. Thank you, Leandro. We should point out, of course, although Uruguay was well prepared for this and has adapted well, other countries in the region, and we'll talk more about this, have taken innovative steps. That includes Colombia's Aprender Digital, efforts in the Dominican Republic to establish more than 1,000 free public Wi-Fi access points, specifically with education in mind, efforts in Paraguay to work with the private sector so that there was zero cost educational software available for students and teachers. So we should say that lots of governments were more nimble and move faster than typically, but we are happy to showcase Plan Ceval and the value of those investments pre-pandemic and how they paid off. I want to remind everyone to continue sending your questions through the Zoom Q&A chat window so that we know what's on your mind. I do have a question, Jacqueline, that has come for you, and it's about a different element of this connectivity question, not merely yes or no in terms of access or only access through your phone, but the quality of broadband infrastructure in the region, questions about 5G and whether those sorts of investments are really necessary so that the quality of internet connection can handle the kind of traffic Leandro was just describing, the video conferencing that students are relying upon for synchronous education rather than a much less ideal form of remote learning, which is listening to a recorded lecture without any opportunity to interact, whether on radio or television or printed materials, things that are better than nothing, but the better options require potentially more infrastructure than exists in much of the region. So that's the question, Jacqueline, when it comes to government and private sector investment in hardware like 5G.
That's a great question. So we have a mobility report, and Ericsson already mapped that the data traffic will grow a lot in the next years. And that's why, so the next generation, 5G, which is already in place in some of the countries, it will be able to handle this data traffic that is increasing a lot. But that's also true that for some applications, you may be able to use, for instance, 4G. And this is why I mentioned during my speech that the 5G auctions that have been designed in some of the countries in which we are shifting from spectrum fees to investments in the sector, they are also important. Because first, the demand from data traffic, the market is matching that. But also by using public policies, for instance, the 5G auction designed for this purpose, you may be able to not only leverage 5G, but also for remote regions, you have coverage obligations. And this kind of obligations will give access, will give connectivity to remote regions. And then you can enhance the whole society, not only for education, but also for other economic activities that can contribute to development of the countries and the economy.
Many thank you, Jacqueline. Christina, we have a question about some of the potential challenges of moving students more online when it comes to learning. Those you could imagine, they sort of range from privacy considerations, data protection issues that we've addressed previously in the Going Digital series, but also special risks that can be presented to children if the online community is not well regulated and others have access to children when they're online, and potentially with parents who can't be there every moment and watch them. Questions as well about screen time considerations that parents have as they're trying to entertain their children without access to some of their traditional activities. I just wonder, Christina, as you think about incorporating more digital tools, more screen time in the lives of Latin America's children, how do you balance some of these potential obstacles and considerations that I've just mentioned?
Well, I think that this is nothing new to be worried about, but something that, because of the number of hours spent in the computer, rose the worry for parents more than ever. But during the last years, there have been a lot of creation of content for digital citizens related with how we keep secure the health when we were worried for the health of the students who were many hours in front of a screen, but also we were concerned about cyberbullying, cybersecurity, all these components that a digital citizen will have if they are educated to become a digital citizen, and that the schools were not considered. As we mentioned before, we were very worried in Latin America for the computers and connectivity, then maybe for teachers training, and then we were concerned about all the risks that technology can bring us. And many countries like Korea, I remember when I was at the government when I went to Korea, and there was a huge issue on those days, and they were very concerned about it. And when I came back to Mexico and we were talking about it, it was not a really concern because not all the people were connected. So I think it is also need to be included in the curriculum of the schools, and also we need to educate all, because with these courses during the pandemic time, what I also learned is that doesn't matter if the population has a degree, it's older than a kid at school, like everybody will need to educate in terms of technology, because this is something that when we were at school, many of us were not having technology like we will have it now. So I think that digital citizenship should be considered not only for students, but also for adults. And yeah, I think it's an emergency, as it is connectivity and other issues that we are talking here.
Leandro, we've talked a lot, I think correctly, about connectivity, about preparing, students and teachers and families and schools to have the right hardware. Jacqueline has talked about 5G and the necessary bandwidth issues that we're addressing. I want to talk about the technologies themselves at Edtech, and whether you found, when you were looking around, you and your peers, for the right software, the right digital platforms, so that you could deploy them immediately. Were they available? As I mentioned in my introductory remarks or earlier in the conversation, it is this undercapitalized part of what is a really vibrant tech startup ecosystem in Latin America these days. And yet the amount of investment, at least in recent years, that has gone into fintech and some other areas has not gone into edtech. So my questions for you are two. One is whether you think, the technologies exist, the companies are there, you have the tools you need, and it's a question of deployment and training, or if not, is there a role for government in incubating this particular sector to address, a current education crisis and a future need for real catch up very quickly throughout Latin America?
Thank you, Benjamin, for the question. I think you hit a nail there in terms of the importance of that question. Yes and no. We found everything we needed, and at the same time, there are some solutions that should be better in terms of the understanding the context of each country and the context and the environment and the ecosystem of platforms and solutions that every country could leverage for their educational systems. Actually, we in Ceibal today we have an ecosystem of platforms and solutions that go from open educational resources to LMSs to personalized learning platforms in terms of mathematics and language. But at the same time, we still we are developing our own solutions for early acquisition in reading and writing, because for the reality in Uruguay and the region, we haven't found those kinds of softwares and solutions in terms of what we need. So I think that I think a national agency of innovation with technology in education, as it is Ceibal, has these two, let's say, objectives. From one side, trying to guarantee a basic access and harnessing of technology for education and learning, and at the same time trying to promote these innovations and trying to foster and moving a little bit forward in terms of how EdTech ecosystem for the country should look like in the next 5 years, 10 years. And I think that the whole Latin American region will experience a huge growth in that aspect, because every country has noticed how important it is, and at the same time we moved from the one-size-fits-all paradigm, and we're seeing that what Uruguay did, what Colombia did, it's excellent, it's important, and we should look at it to learn from it, but at the same time we should be focusing on the capacities and context of each country and the technologies they already have to build from there and not try to reinvent the wheel once and again.
Excellent. No, I agree. I mean, would have thought that the investment would be flowing, the idea of reskilling, the future of work, these conversations we've been hearing about for quite a while, and there seemed to be an obvious role for remote learning technologies, particularly in the reskilling category, where people who were living busy lives and needing to upskill, their resumes. But you're absolutely right. I think now the openness to these technologies is quite different than it was just a year and a half ago, and that does present lots of economic opportunities. And so I hope you're right. I think that we will see that sector advancing in the way we have seen in like fintech, for example, which we talked about. We had the CEO of dLocal, an Uruguay and unicorn, as part of this series, talking about that sector is really vibrant growth. Before we conclude, we just have about 10 minutes left. I want to go to each of you, starting with you, Jacqueline, then Christina, and back to you, Leandro, on the public policy side of this. We've talked about a lot of issues. We've asked a lot of governments in the region to address this education crisis now, to incorporate technology in the future. We've touched on the question of 5G or even 4G, where it doesn't exist in much of the region. Christina, the questions of training teachers in education. Leandro, you just went over the issue of the ecosystem and innovation for EdTech. Just starting with you, Jacqueline, prioritize for us, if you would, what governments should be doing with whatever resources they can marshal to address the urgent and the now medium-term education challenges with technology in mind.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your question. So each government, each country has its own situation. As we mentioned, sometimes they are in different levels, and inside each country, you may have different regions as well. So what I think it's key is dialogue. I mentioned the partnership on this. So the role of the public-private partnership is key, because first you need to map what are your gaps, where you should focus your resources. We know they are scarce, and also in terms of priorities. You need to balance what should you do first. Sometimes, let's pretend before the pandemics, nobody could predict this level of challenge we faced. So sometimes you have a plan and then something unexpected happens. What should you do? So you need to work together with dialogue, public-private partnership, and then you can map and address with the correct priority for each country, each region.
Excellent, Jacqueline. Christina, help us prioritize for governments, not only Mexico, but elsewhere, in the development of EdTech and the deployment of EdTech, in the hardware questions and the teacher training. There's a lot we've discussed, Christina. What should be the top three maybe priorities for governments to catch up on the lost education that we've talked about that students have suffered over the last year?
Well, I totally agree with Jacqueline about the partnership with other actors. I think that it's very important that the government doesn't work. Governments don't need to do everything alone. There are a lot of things already done. And when you are at the government, you want to reinvent everything and you want to create from zero. When you have companies like Coursera that has a lot of content already cured and already studied what is needed in the industry, for example, and we need to use that group of people that work day and night constructing solutions and not start from zero from everything. I also consider that we need to keep thinking in supporting teachers, because as I mentioned before, they are the ones who are the closest with the students. Like if we want really transformation, we need to work with them and help them to have the skills, the materials, the technology to keep training the new generations. And we also need to think differently in terms of education, because it is not surprising that all these companies that have include new ways to learn are the ones who are succeeding during this pandemic crisis. Like Coursera grew more than 400% during this time. And it is not because they were giving the things for free at the beginning. It's because they have what people need. They have short courses, they have great courses. So I think that we need to think more about what we can do with partners and not work alone from the government side.
Excellent, Christina. Back to you, Leandro. You've mentioned that I think, Plan Cebal has been at it for more than 15 years. So that was clearly some forethought in terms of getting laptops to Uruguayan students. What should we be doing now in Uruguay and elsewhere for 15 years from now so that the region, can once again say, okay, we had forethought and the proper investment in education?
First of all, think of state policy beyond political parties and the immediate, let's say, impulses. Second of all, be ready to run a marathon in this aspect, not a speed race. This is going to be, let's say, forever. Think about the infrastructural aspects of the power for a country, or communications, or roads, and also think about that infrastructure in terms of digital learning and communications and connectivity. What is the level of connectivity available? What technology is it using? How can we build on that? What technology is based on? What are we going to need next? What partnerships can we build so that we can move these initiatives forward? And at the same time, thinking about the interoperability of your technologies, that demands a lot of strategical thinking in how you're going to intertwine your let's say, digital ecosystem in terms of communications, connectivity, and education also. So I think that the main aspect is having broad conversations with your population, and also agreements, and at the same time the certainty that is going to be a marathon and not a speed race.
Excellent, Leandro, Jacqueline, Christina. I think we've given policymakers, companies, experts, and others, a lot to think about and a lot of actions to take as we address, again, both the challenges right now with families and teachers and principals trying to keep kids active in school and continue their education, and also the catch-up period that will follow the pandemic when it ends, and ways to benefit from what we've learned that I think is positive during this period. And I think we have pointed out that there's a new realization about a lot of these tools, and there may have been reluctance to try them before, and now I think they will be incorporated in the curricula throughout the region going forward. Let me thank everyone who participated in this conversation, everyone who shared insights and your questions. Thank you very much to our generous co-sponsors, Zoom Video Communications, the Information Technology Industry Council, ITI, both great partners for this event and great partners in our entire Going Digital series. As I mentioned earlier, you can find on the event page shortly after this conversation concludes the full recording of it. If you missed any sections of it or would like to share it with others, you can find the full recordings of our previous Going Digital conversations as we in the Latin American program at the Wilson Center continue to delve into the process of digitalization going on in Latin America, very much accelerated over the past year and a half, looking at the challenges, but above all, the opportunities that public policy can really help these industries grow and can make sure that Latin Americans continue to have confidence in these digital tools that can address a range of social and economic challenges. And importantly for our topic today, the challenge of keeping Latin American children in school and making sure that the future of Latin America's workforce includes children who have had very good educational opportunities, including in this very difficult time. Let me thank everyone again, Leandro, Jacqueline, Christina. This was a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for being a part of it.